Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some books that I did not finish in the months of January, February, and March. I decided to try something new this year. Instead of doing monthly wrap-ups where I talk about all the books I read within a certain month, I would try doing seasonal wrap-ups and seasonal did not finish videos. And the reason I decided to try this out is because I've noticed for myself that sometimes I'll pick up a book and I'll realize that the book requires my absolute full attention, but I've already started another book also, because I know a lot of you do the same thing, kind of try to read more than one book at once. And I've found though that sometimes this doesn't work and I really need to have all of my focus on one book. Or I start a book and I start with the audiobook and I really don't like the audiobook and I try to give it a shot and just the narrator doesn't click with me, so I kind of have a bitter taste in my mouth for that book. I need to set it aside and then try the physical version. By allowing myself a couple of months to have a fresh start with a book, then it prevents me from completely DNFing books or hate reading a book, which is, you know, when you don't like the book or you have some kind of negative opinion of it right from the start, but you finish it anyway and you just never enjoy yourself. Sometimes I find that's on me and it's not on the book, it's not fair to the author. So I'm trying to give myself more time to be flexible with books and see if sometimes a book really isn't to my liking or if it's that there's some other thing at play. With the 3 books that I completely DNF'd, I didn't actually have one of those situations. I put them down because I wasn't feeling them and I found I never had an inclination to pick them back up. And so I just didn't think it was fair for me to push through them and then review them when even though I try to do reviews in a way where I present the main elements of the story as, oh, if you are this kind of reader, you'll like it, or if you're this kind of reader, you might not like it. Even though I try to show the subjective sides of things, I still know that if I don't care for something, it's probably going to seep through, and I just don't think that's fair. So that was what happened with these 3 books. I'm gonna start with the one that I'm pretty bummed about because this was actually an anticipated release for me for this year, but that would be Kingdom of Copper. Kingdom of Copper is the sequel to City of Brass by S Alma School Rd, and this is a story that takes place kind of in 2 different areas. It's partially in 18th century Cairo, and then it's partially in this magical land. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give away spoilers. We follow 2 main characters, a girl named Nahri, who is, when we first meet her in Cairo, she seems to have a natural inclination toward some kind of magic, but she doesn't think it's magic, and she uses her abilities to scam people, and one day it goes pretty terribly wrong and she ends up summoning this Jinn warrior. And it was a very interesting premise, and it was definitely really unique because rather than pulling from a lot of European influences, it pulled from different influences that I found really refreshing, and I really enjoyed that about the book. However, I really couldn't stand the main character. She just drove me crazy, and I am definitely the kind of reader who, if I don't like a character, it makes it really hard for me to like the story, even if the story is executed well and the plot is interesting. So it took me a long time to get into the first one. I started to get more into it when another character kind of began to have more significance, and I really liked his character. His name was Alizade. He was a prince in the magical kingdom, and he was involved with so much political scheming, and I love that kind of stuff in books. So I really liked his perspective. He was a very interesting character in that he was both a warrior in how he was trained. He was trained to be a really good fighter, and he was religious, and he was kind of involved with some sketchy political stuff. And so I found him to be a very fascinating character, and I really liked his perspective. But when I picked up the second one, I knew that it took me a while to get into the first one, and in the end I really enjoyed it. I was hoping that this one would kind of sort of pick up where the first one left off, because it left off in a very exciting way, and I was really anticipating that in this one. But the way this one starts, I think it was going to be another situation where it was going to take me a really long time to get into it, and I just didn't want to have to, within the sequel, wait for a really long time before I felt really engaged. The second book that I DNF'd is once again a sequel, and that would be The Heart of Betrayal by Mary E. Pearson. This is the sequel to Kiss of Deception, and I picked up this series because, one, I owned the first two. I got them from my local used bookstore, and Murphy over from Murphy Napier, she loves this series, and she's always talking about how she really admires the main character's growth and their arc throughout the trilogy, and I love that kind of stuff. I completely agree that those kinds of stories are very enticing because I like seeing a character go from flawed to, you know, they're still flawed in the end, but I like them to progress toward being a better version of themselves. And she said that is very, very prevalent in this trilogy. However, I can only handle a character being extremely stupid for so long. It really, really annoys me. It drives me crazy. And she did something, and I might have to get into spoilers, so maybe I'll put like a little spoilers thing right here so that those of you that don't want to be spoiled will know, and I'll take that away when it's gone. But I'm gonna say why this character really drove me crazy. Before I get into the spoiler part, I do want to give you all the premise of the first book so that if it sounds interesting, you can pick it up. Just because it wasn't for me doesn't mean it won't be for you. So the first one, we follow this character who right at the beginning of the story decides that she does not want to fulfill this political marriage that she's being thrust into, and so she's going to run away. It's a very, very interesting and gripping beginning because it starts right with her deciding, nope, I'm not gonna do this. And so she runs off, her best friend slash servant goes with her, and she decides, I'm just gonna live life like a normal gal, and I'm gonna work at this tavern, and I'm gonna have a happy love story someday. And that's all fine. There's a lot of political stuff in the story that I thought was done really well. The political sides of things were super interesting because since she left, other stuff starts to happen and there's consequences, and I really liked that part of the story. I also thought the setup for the other perspectives was really fascinating. So the idea is that there are two individuals that are trying to seek out this runaway princess. One of them is an assassin who wants to make sure that she never comes back to fulfill the alliance, and the other one is the prince that she was supposed to marry. And you don't know which perspective is which. I did a whole review on it if you're more interested in hearing that. But I thought that was really interesting. And for a long time, you don't know who is who, and then when you finally find out, it's kind of a reveal. And I thought all of that was so unique, and I definitely appreciated the author taking a chance on doing that because that was not the easiest thing to pull off. So I really enjoyed all those elements of the story. However, this is where I get into talking a little bit about spoilers because the romantic sides of things didn't really work for me, and the reason is the main chick is she's just so hypocritical. She doesn't know who these two guys are. She's somewhat interested in them, but she's really only interested in the one guy. Turns out the one guy that she's interested in is the prince. And so it's kind of ironic that she falls for this guy that she was supposed to marry anyway, but she doesn't know it's him. He does know that she was the lost princess. So at the end of the first book, the two of them, they basically get captured by their enemies, and the other guy that at first you didn't know if he was the prince or the assassin, it turns out. So he ends up kind of capturing them and turning them over to his leaders, and they are imprisoned together, and she has now come to realize who this man is, this prince that she didn't realize was a prince. This whole time she thought he was just a normal dude, and she's having a normal life and falling in love like normal people do. And so she's thinking all of this had happened organically, finds out who he really is, and then throws a hissy fit. And the reason this bugged me so much is so she's flipping out saying like, you lied to me, you lied to me. And he's like, you lied to me too, you know? And she's like, but the difference is I really gave up my life as a princess, but you never gave up your life as a prince, which isn't true. It's not true because at the end of the first book, she decides she is going to go back home and fulfill her duties as princess because of some bad stuff that starts going down as a result of her running away. So at the very end of the book, after like a few months of living her life freely, she's like, oh shoot, I messed up. I actually caused a lot of trouble for other people. People are dying now. I need to go back home and fulfill my life as a princess. And that's what she starts to do at the end of the book, and then she gets captured. So she did not give up her life as a princess. She most definitely was going to go back. And then she like slaps the guy, and she's telling him how it was so not fair because he was betraying her trust. And it's like, you didn't tell him who you were. And not only that, you're slapping him. You guys are imprisoned right now. How about you calm down and figure out how the heck to get out of your enemy's territory? It just is super impractical and stupid. Okay, spoiler rant over. I apologize for those of you who had to be excluded from that portion of this video. The last DNF from the first 3 months of the year would be Roar by Cora Carmack. And this is actually a reread for me. It's not a bad book. I rarely think books are garbage anyway, but it just so was not for me. For those of you that are not like me and you really like romance to be kind of the main element pushing the story forward, and you like romance in a fantastical setting, that is exactly what this is. The storm magic in the story, because the premise is that we have our main character who is the heir to a throne, and in their world, it's actually really fascinating and really cool. In their world, there are catastrophic natural disasters, and all these natural disasters are considered storms in some way, and all of these storms have storm hearts, and there are some people that can kind of suppress the storms, and these people have become royalty, and they have become the leaders, and people generally gravitate toward where these leaders are because that's where it's going to be safe. And then there are these wildlands where there isn't really royalty suppressing the storms, and so it's much more dangerous to live out there. So all of that's really interesting. I thought that was a great premise, and our main character has no storm magic, so that's kind of a problem. And so she is supposed to, at the beginning of the story, marry this man who does have storm magic, so that way nobody finds out. Phew, she's safe, her secret no longer is a big deal, and they can keep their kingdom afloat. And so I think that the setup is really good, and the storm magic part of the stories I think are why I liked the book so much the first time, because storm magic stuff is really cool, but the romance, I just am not really a big fan of romances being so significant to the plot, and that's really it. That's really what it comes down to. So if you do like romance in your fantasy stories, the storm magic and the premise of this I think are still really cool, but I didn't like the lovey-dovey stuff. Anyway, that is it for the 3 books that I DNF'd. I really hope that some of you heard the synopsis of the story and thought, wow, that actually sounds really cool. I really want to check that out. I don't think any of these, if you do think the synopsis sounds cool, I think you would enjoy the story. I don't think that these books have been published and are popular without merit. I think a lot of them are going to be stories that a lot of you really like. They just ultimately were not for me. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.